A lot of people think that addiction is all about drugs and alcohol. It's not. Addiction could be many things. It's whatever you rely on or whatever you delve into that pretty much manages you and becomes your number one priority over everything else, to where you lose yourself. For me, like I said, it started with wanting to escape and not face the emotions and the feelings that I was feeling. So, like I said, I fluctuated in and out of jail, in and out of jail, in and out of jail, committed crimes because of my addiction. I was homeless several times and chronically homeless, because you got to want to change. Because if you don't want to change, nothing's going to happen. Nobody can make you change.
You are welcome to Spot On with StephREDD.
How are you, StephREDD, today?
I am fantastic. In Spot On with StephREDD, we talk about different topics, just different issues.
There's a form of artist in everyone.
I love to be very independent.
And the recognition of the genius that we are and who we are.
I sound very smart, but I have zero education.
I always learn something from everybody I work with.
To see how we can embrace new perspectives and, quite importantly, be able to progressively evolve with the fullness of who we are, the fullness of our genius.
When you are living a fulfilled life, that means that's the feedback loop that you are on the right path.
When you can give value to someone, that's your greatest gift to the world, and that's when people will listen to you.
And then begin to impact our world with that genius, one person at a time. Hello, we are back with Carlos today. It is going to be a really phenomenal discussion with an amazing gentleman who I feel really honored to have on today. His name is Carlos Morciego. Carlos battled a drug problem and needed a break from the world. He hid away, thinking he was losing his mind in the silence. Solitude scared him because all he had was his thoughts. But over time, as he faced those thoughts, the screams, the insults in his head, something shifted. He found God. He found himself. He left behind his addiction. He left behind everything that had been a source of strength, though negatively thus far. Carlos wants to share with us how vital that kind of solitude was, what it did to him, and how he eventually came out from it. The one that might make you feel crazy, but in embracing it, you discover who you are. And once you embrace it, nothing can scare you again. Make welcome Carlos Morciego. Carlos!
Hi, Stephanie.
Hi, Carlos. How are you? I am fantastic. It's good to have you here.
Thank you. It is really great to be here, Stephanie. Merry Christmas. I hope everything has been well with you and your family.
Ho, ho, ho. It's been fantastic. Yes, it has. So tell me, Carlos, I am really enthused to know what this solitude was. What is it about this solitude? And I saw abuse, right? Is it addiction, rather? Drug abuse, somewhere in reading through your bio.
Yes.
Tell me about what was it with this addiction? What was it with the solitude? Just take it on and tell us all about it.
I'd love to. I'd like to start off by saying that hopefully by the end of this message, there's somebody out there who can relate to my story and hopefully take something away from it, because it took a lot of pain. There was a lot of misery. There was a lot of discomfort, both mentally, emotionally and spiritually. So the whole reason behind why I took the hermitage was to get away from everybody and everything. And just like you mentioned, at the time I was dealing with an addiction, and I was in active addiction, and I had already gone through that once before, but this time it was a lot different and it was a lot harder, and it took me to a place that I had once known before and didn't like and didn't want to go through again. So I took it upon myself to go live in the woods. Now, mind you, I live in Miami, Florida, and it's beautiful and it's sunny and there's beaches. But at the time, I was living in another state called Delaware, and it's very suburban woodland area, except for in the city. So there's a lot of woods, there's a lot of creeks, there's a lot of rivers, there's a lot of places where you can isolate yourself. And one day I decided to do just that, to just get away from everyone and everything. And I started looking around.
I want to ask Carlos, permit me to ask, before you got to that point of wanting to go to the woods, how does all this, what made you even get to that point? Tell us about the addiction. How did it start? Where did it start? To the point where you needed to go to the woods?
That's a good question because a lot of people themselves don't realize when everything started for them. A lot of people think that addiction is all about drugs and alcohol, and it's not. Addiction could be many things. It's whatever you rely on or whatever you delve into that pretty much manages you and becomes your number one priority over everything else, to where you lose yourself and you lose your family. Stephanie, as far back as I can remember, at least for me, it started when I was very young and with video games. I was probably like about, I want to say 7 or 8 years old. And at the time, back then we didn't have Xbox, we didn't have PS3, PS6s or nothing like that. We had simple games like Atari or the very first Nintendo Entertainment System, that Nintendo NES.
Yeah,
And
I'm with you on that.
remember that? Yeah, I'm telling you myself. I'm telling you my age right now. So back then, during that time when I was a kid, I used to get bullied in school, and my parents were very traditional parents, very old school, and I remember getting bullied by these kids in school, and I would just take it and take it and take it and take it and take it until I just couldn't take it anymore, and I was fed up. And it was kind of like filling up a bottle. You can only fill up a bottle so much until it overflows, or a dynamite stick will remain a dynamite stick until the wick starts getting so close to where it detonates and explodes. And I grew up with very traditional parents, and back then it was instilled a lot where, if you were on your bike and you fell on your bike and you scraped your knees or you got hurt, if your father was around and said, "Hey, come on, get up, don't cry. Boys don't cry, okay? Boys don't cry. Come on, pick up your chin, son." And you had to hold, you held your pain. But if mom was around, it's like, "Oh, my poor baby, no, come here," and you were coddled, And next thing you know, you're wrapped with your arms around mom's neck and you're crying, and she's rubbing on your back and she's kissing your wound and she's taking care of it. So, you're being healed, through the maternal. But as boys, we are brought up by our fathers to have this attitude and this characteristic of nothing hurts us. Nothing hurts us. We're the warriors. You're a big boy. So when it came down to other kids bullying me and getting into fights at the park because other kids in the neighborhood also bullied. Because at the time I grew up was in the 80s, 90s era. So around my neighborhood, there was a lot of, juvenile delinquency. There was a lot of kids that were joining gangs. There was a lot of kids who were not going down the right path because they themselves, I don't know, maybe felt like they needed to be a part of something. So I got into a lot of fights. And especially in school, I would, come home and start playing video games after I did my homework. Or sometimes I wouldn't do homework. I would just delve into the video games and play video games all day, all evening, all night, up to like the early morning. I'm telling you, like 8 to 10 hours playing video games, sometimes on the weekends. Come Friday, come 6 o'clock, I was up until maybe 8 o'clock. Come 6 o'clock in the evening, I was up to like maybe 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning playing video games because I didn't want to lose where I was. Because I always played video games that were like hero-based games because I needed to feel a certain way. So me escaping the feelings of being ostracized, feelings of being felt like I was worthless, feelings of me feeling like I don't belong, like I'm a misfit. Playing video games with the heroes in it made me feel like I accomplished something because I didn't feel like I was gonna ever accomplish anything because I was being told I was this, I was that. You're fat, you're ugly, you got braces in your mouth, you're metal mouth, you're ugly, you're this, you're that. As kids, and then it gets to a point where a person generally will only take so much. And I think that's true with anybody. And I would get in fights in school, and then my parents, I never talked about it. My parents never really asked how things were going in school. So as long as they saw that the report card was good, they suspected that everything was okay until I would get into fights. And then, my parents would be in school because the principal called my parents because I got into another fight. And then my parents, especially my dad, he'd be like, what are you doing? What's wrong with you? Why you keep getting into fights? I'm gonna wait till we get home. I'm gonna show you this, that. And I wouldn't say anything until the day came where I just couldn't take it anymore. And I had got into another fight, and both my parents came to school, and that's when I let it out. And it's like, and by this time I was maybe about 13, and in 7th grade in middle school, I got into a fight with some kids in school, and I just couldn't hold it anymore. I told my dad, this has been going on since I was 6 years old, and my dad was taken aback. He actually didn't know how to react to that when I told him that this is what's been going on, and I've been having to defend myself for so long. And, and the school doesn't do anything, the teachers don't do anything, because since I went to private school, the teachers came to our class. We didn't go to classrooms. We always stayed in the same classroom. So can you imagine 6 hours a day, for like 30 minutes at a time between teachers, getting picked on, getting bullied, being laughed at by a particular group of kids inside the same class? That does something to somebody, especially a young kid. So my addiction first started with video games. Then at the age of 16, because of, again, feeling like a misfit, wanting to fit in, alcohol. And it was just exploratory, experimental. And then at 16, it was marijuana. Experimental, trying to fit in with the rest of the kids in high school. What's this like? Everybody's talking about it. But I was a bit of a nerd, so I grew up with a lot of encyclopedias. I was a bit of a nerd. So if it wasn't video games, it was books. And I would just go through encyclopedias 2 or 3 or 4 times, like within 2 or 3 years, until I got a new set and an updated version. And then I would go through that and keep going through it. And I was very smart. That's why I got good grades, because I read a lot. So it was either delving into books at home or at the library. So when it came to marijuana, when it came to drugs, I started doing research and I found that marijuana isn't that bad. Or it's not that it's not bad, it's not addictive. It could do this to you, it could do that to you. These are the pros, these are the cons. So I said, okay, well, at least it's definitely better than alcohol. And plus, I didn't drink that much, but you underage drank in order to fit in at parties or be the cool kid who brings the alcohol to the party. And then it went from marijuana and alcohol at 16 to cocaine at 18. And again, I would do my research. And even though there were a lot of red flags upon reading what this chemical was, where it came from, how it was made, I didn't think it would happen to me. The addiction part of cocaine. And I tried it once when I was 18 and nothing happened. And then later on at a party, I tried it again. Same kind of feeling, like I really don't know what to feel. But then as time went on and I started hanging around with other people in order to fit in, to be cool, I started doing what they were doing. And what they were doing was going to some of the best clubs in Miami Beach at the time. This was back in the 90s. Going to some of the best parties, making money. And I was 18, impressionable, wanting to fit in, wanting friends, and I wanted money. I wanted girls. In order to get girls, you had to have some kind of money because you had to have a nice car, and and everything else that comes with that, right? Especially as a young man. And at the time, I did have a girlfriend. I had met her in high school, but that other side of me wanted to show that I was a little bit more than who I thought I was or could be. So not only was I doing cocaine at the time, I was selling it as well. And I went to some of the best clubs in Miami, Spanish clubs, American clubs, disco clubs, electronic dance music clubs, or what we called trance back then. And it was an amazing time, don't get me wrong. But I was getting involved with people that if I knew then what I know now about where this took me, I think I would take a time capsule back in time, find myself within a club, and smack myself around a bit and saying, listen, kid, you have no idea what you're dealing with. Take myself to the back of a club, beat myself up, kick myself in the butt, and send my butt home. If I only would have known then what I know now. Hindsight's 2020.
This is a lot of deep stuff, and I I have a lot of questions. Just wondering how from the addiction, and truly, this is the speaking with you made me come to the awareness that addiction is not always drugs. Because every time you hear addiction, the first thing that comes to mind, oh, is a drug addict, is on drugs. But then addiction can actually be a game. Addiction can actually be a movie or TV. And for you it was TV. And what I hear you say is the reason because when you were speaking, I was quickly noting down that as parents we need to learn to ask our kids, talk to them, engage them. We need to strengthen not just their fit, strengthen them, be a pillar to them, not just for physical strength but for emotional and psychological strength as well. Because just hearing you, it was that vacuum of not being able to talk to your parents that made you hide in video games and hide
Yeah.
in books and hide to the point where, and when you said the video games give you a sense of superhero because you watch superhero, you play superhero video games, And it just makes you feel that thing of, right, oh, at least I'm shooting someone down in the real world. Someone is shooting me down. Now here I can shoot someone down. Right. And I'm just different things going through my head. But how low did you drop? And at what point what suffered? First, what suffered as a result of this addiction? When by the time you were doing cocaine and selling cocaine, what suffered? Who suffered? What did you lose? What did you gain? And how low did you drop?
That's a fantastic question, and you're absolutely right. We isolate, and there's different types of addictions. There's being a workaholic. There's going to the gym and spending too much time in the gym. There's overeating. There's undereating, not taking care of yourself. There's gambling. Again, like I mentioned previously, addiction is something that it's whatever it is that you do that takes time away from your responsibilities in life, where you ignore those responsibilities and you start not taking care of yourself. If you have children, you start not taking care of children or your spouse or your household, or you start neglecting other responsibilities that take priority, like your job, paying bills. Because in order for you, because unfortunately we live in a society where you need to work in order to pay for a place to live, in order to pay for your water bill, for your light bill, for food in the refrigerator. That refrigerator needs to be powered. And it's a cycle. It's a vicious cycle, unfortunately. We're not hunter-gatherers anymore. We're out hunting and fishing. And even if we were, if you have an addiction to something, you're not going to go hunting, you're not going to go fishing, and you're going to starve, you're going to die. So for me, like I said, it started with wanting to escape and not face the emotions and the feelings that I was feeling, or trying to understand, what was happening outside of my environment. So going back to the time when I was 18 and selling cocaine, I was actually doing that undercover. From the age of 16, I had like my own little entrepreneurial experiences where I was working on my own, whether it was cutting grass for neighbors or selling perfume out on the street, or this time selling leather belts, leather wallets, and leather fanny packs out throughout the city. Like I would buy stuff on consignment and then go sell it, and at the end of the day I would settle. And sometimes I would wait a whole week to settle. So in the meantime, while I'm selling these products, I'm also selling drugs. And at night I'm selling drugs at the club. And it came to a point where my father must have picked up on something and was going through one of my drawers in my bedroom, and he found a huge wad of cash. I mean, a big wad. This was a lot of money. I want to say I must have had about $8,000. And he's like, Carlos. Right. So, mind you, I didn't see him going through my drawer. He called me to the kitchen as soon as I got home. And my mom was there. And on the table there was this money. And I'm like, oh shoot. Okay. Yeah. I'm like, damn. Because I never kept drugs in the house. Ever. I never disrespected my house that way. Everything was kept somewhere else. So, point is that I sat down with my dad and he says, Carlos, where are you getting this money from? And I said, Dad, I mean, you see how late I come home? I'm doing really well with this business. I'm working 12, 14 hours a day, which is true. Most of the time I'll break 10, 12, 14 hours out on the road. But this was between selling belts and other belts and selling drugs. I don't think he bought it, but because I was dressing well, buying fancy clothes, buying things for my girlfriend, giving them money, even though they didn't want to accept it. I was paying bills at the house, though they didn't need it, but I'm sure my dad appreciated it. But it was because of this conversation that I ended up joining the military and getting out of this lifestyle where I stayed clean and sober. Well, I won't say clean because I wasn't doing drugs in the military, but I was drinking like a fish. Because in the military, you yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Because in the
In the
military,
military, you
hey,
can
we're
drink.
men, we're overseas.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Like a fish, you said.
Yeah, yeah. We drank like fish. Oh boy. We drank like fish. Especially when you're overseas, and that was fun. That was a great experience. I'm not gonna lie. But I ended up marrying my high school sweetheart after 5 years of being together, and a month and a half later, after being married, around Thanksgiving weekend of 1999, my father died, and I received that phone call by way of my wife, and I was nowhere in a right mental capacity to ever have accepted that, even though all the signs were there that day. So, to make a long story short, my dad dies, and I become angry with God. I become angry with myself. I start exhibiting anger towards a lot of people, but it wasn't because I was angry. It was because I was so grief stricken that, and I didn't have, again, not having a way to deal with it, no coping skill, not having any counseling, because unfortunately the military really didn't do much for me, except send me home on 10 days leave and come back and expect me to go back to work. I started isolating again, which is a key element, when it comes to me. I started isolating. I was married back then, mind you, and my wife was already living with me. So again, I had to become this strong man that I was always taught to be. Don't cry. Don't hold it in. You're gonna be okay. Push through. Get up. There's nothing to worry about. And I became very, very grief stricken. And there were moments where I had to cry in front of my wife, but I didn't cry in front of anybody else. I didn't cry in front of anybody else, but I would cry in front of my wife because I just couldn't take it anymore. A song would play, and it would remind me of him. I would be staring at pictures of him. Excuse me. Oh, man. Yeah, memories. Oh, sorry. Give me a minute. Because it's all coming back to me now. It's all flashbacks. And I remember being home over Christmas Eve, and I got so drunk. And I got drunk in a very vulnerable place, not having dad around, and drinking his liquor. As a matter of fact, I was inside of his liquor cabinet, which he always kept just for guests. My dad wasn't an alcoholic. My dad didn't barely. If you saw my dad with a beer in his hand, that was a miracle. If you saw my mom with a beer in her hand, it was probably Christmas Eve. You know, or she was making chicken or rice, and it had to have half a beer in it, so she would drink the other half, and that was rare. There wasn't any alcoholism in my family, but there was a lot of workaholism. There was a lot of workaholism, workaholism. My dad would work a lot and wouldn't deal with his issues either. So, go figure. I came to find out that my dad had a lot of secrets that he was dealing with. It also, poor guy, medical issues that he didn't want to share with the family in order not to worry us later on in life. I found this out. So point is, over Thanksgiving, over Christmas, excuse me, I get so drunk where I don't know what I don't remember using cocaine. I don't remember how I got it, but I remember popping up on a urinalysis for it. And your question was, where did this take me? Here was the beginning of the spiral of what became my life. I lost my military career after a year and a half. I was court-martialed. And stripped of all rank and pay. I was given a bad conduct discharge by the military. I was in the United States Marine Corps. I lost my sense of self through that sense of grief and that anger, because I was always angry with everything and everyone. And you couldn't talk to me a certain way because I would just turn around and snap and bite you like a mad dog. After coming back to Miami and living in Miami, I hated my job. I hated working in civilian life. I hated the living situation where I was in, living with my in-laws and not having to be quiet during intimacy because, my parents are home. Having, this or that, the other, because my parents are home. So why are we living with your parents? Happy couple wants a happy house and a happy life alone. But no, I'm in this situation, and I ended up doing something that is very detrimental and what we call in recovery, because I'm in active recovery today, after 20 years. It's old people, old places, and old things. And what this means is you can't hang around old people that are still doing the same things you used to do. Old places, going to old places where you used to do things that you really no longer want to do or used to do, and old things, meaning behaviors that you used to do that you no longer want to do. So when I was in this misery, I started hanging around with people that I used to go to clubs with and sell cocaine with. Because I wanted to get away from my reality. Here I am escaping again. We're escaping. Hi, we're escaping. We're getting away. We're running. We're running away. I was running away from my situation. Point being that I got so deep and so far down the rabbit hole, Stephanie, that after a year and a half of being back in Miami, so this happened in 1999 when my dad died. I got kicked out in 2001. I'm living back in Miami in January of 2002. Come summer of 2003, my wife and I get into a fight because it was so much between spending money, coming home late, leaving and not coming back for hours, and not saying who I was with, except for I was with my friends, her not believing it, her thinking I'm cheating, which I never did. I never cheated on my wife, but I was doing drugs. I was spending money. I was spending $600 a week for 2-3 weeks at a time on cocaine. Using, not selling, consuming. So I wasn't making money off of it. It was everything. Yes. Yes, this happened like a year and a half after that. So my dad dies in 1999. I get kicked out of the military in 2001. I moved back to Miami in January of 2000. Yes, like December December 18th of 2001. I'm back in Miami. I start working around January of 2002. I hate my job. I hate my life. I hate everything and everyone, and even myself. You know, a lot of resentments, a lot of regrets. So I started doing the same thing I did once before, hanging around with old people, old places, and old things. And all that did was destroy my marriage. So by summer of 2003, my wife kicks me out of the house, of her parents' house, and by summer of 2004, we're divorced.
Wow. So this is I guess this is what you can call polycrisis. Several things at the same time. Your father's
Yes,
death. You were just trying. I mean, you were just trying to. It was a point where you were trying to put your head up. You joined the army, and then your father dies, and then you somewhat regress, and then you get kicked out of the army, and then your marriage packs up, and it's almost like as
yeah,
if you go back down into addiction. At what point?
yeah, and you go even deeper.
So what has happened between that very low place and now? What changed? What you talked about a lot of bitterness, a lot of hurt. What was the bitterness about? How did you heal from it? What happened in that period, that transition phase between who Carlos has become now and that point where you lost your marriage? What happened?
So there was a lot of ups and downs during that period. I got remarried. There were periods of recovery where I wasn't using, or let's say abstinence. I wasn't in recovery. I wasn't living the life of a recovering addict. I just
Okay.
stopped. I was on the wagon because of legal issues. So there were legal issues. There was jail, in and out of jail.
I hear you say jail. What happened with jail? Please tell me about this jail.
So when you're doing drugs, eventually at some point, God does for you what you're not willing to do for yourself. And something happens to you, and you get caught by the police, either trying to buy or with it in your possession, or something happens where it involves law enforcement. And then you're arrested for possession of cocaine, and then you have to go in front of a judge. And then you're put into into a drug treatment program in order to get right. But you being the bad addict that you are, you don't want any help because you want to destroy yourself because you think you know what you're doing is best for you, and you're enjoying how you're living and you're enjoying what you're doing. But it's only because you're using this as a band-aid for your hurting and your grief and your anger, but you don't know that yet. But yet you don't know that yet because all you know at the time is that you can't stop and you gotta have it.
Tell me about when did you get a eureka moment? When was your first eureka moment of, hey boy, do you want to keep being here? What were the eureka moments that you had, either pre-jail or during jail or whatever it was, that helped you to find yourself?
So, like I said, I fluctuated in and out of jail, in and out of jail, in and out of jail, committed crimes because of my addiction. I was homeless several times and chronically homeless. My physical nature changed. I lost weight like most addicts do who do nothing but consume. They get consumed. And I got consumed. Um, so after,
They get consumed. They consume to the point where they get consumed by what they're consuming.
exactly. So my eureka moment was a point when I was in Delaware where again, I started consuming heavily. And there was this place I would visit. So in order to get my drugs, I would panhandle, I would scam people out of money, I would steal, I would lie, I would cheat people. in order to get money for more drugs. And I would work too. Don't get me wrong. I would, you know, use to live and live to use. I would work here and there. I would never have stable employment because eventually I would get fired, or I just wouldn't want to go anymore because I don't want to do this anymore. I need a break. I just want to use. Addictive mentality. And I used to hang out at this place called Wawa. But I didn't hang out there in order to just ask people for money. At the time, I was homeless, and regardless of what I've done in my life, I've always had work. I've always worked. So I would hang out in front of this place on this Wawa with my backpack, work boots, work pants, work shirt, work jacket, even in the middle of winter. And the summer, t-shirt, work pants, work short, work boots. And like at early in the morning, around 5 in the morning, all these work vans, work pickup trucks, landscaper guys, they'd all come to go get their coffee, something quick to eat, maybe get some lunch. And I would, ask the guy in charge, or, hey, is this your own company? Hey, look, I'm looking for work. And it was through these people that they would either give me money or they would give me a job for that day. Or if they didn't, and I didn't get anything there, I'll at least get some money. And I'll go across the street to the Home Depot and I'll ask for work there. Or I would ask for money. If once I had enough money, I would go and do and I wouldn't work that day. But it was one day this guy who was a veteran, just like me. His name's Jim. I'm not gonna forget this guy. He knew what I was doing. He knew I was using drugs. He wasn't stupid. But because of the conversations he and I had over time, and getting to know each other, and him being a veteran too, he decided, let me give this guy $5 or $10 here and there. Let me help him out. And one day, we had a conversation, and he says, "Hey, Carlos, when are things going to change?" When are you going to accept that you got to do something different, Carlos? I mean, I remember the conversation differently, but the gist of his conversation is, you're going to want to change, Carlos. You can't be living like this, man. You weren't meant for this. I mean, look, dude, you're a veteran. You've been through so much. If you only put that same amount of fortitude that you had back then in the military into your life now, you'll change. At least that's what I understood from him, because of the way he said it. That's what I understood. Because you got to want to change. Because if you don't want to change, nothing's going to happen. Nobody can make you change.
Absolutely. It has to be a choice from within. Absolutely. Absolutely, yeah. So was that your wake-up call?
That was my first wake-up call, because I ended up homeless again through active addiction after my mom's death in June of 2017, all the way until I was homeless all the way until, I want to say, September of 2017.
Was this before you were in jail or after you came out?
After, way after. I was living in Delaware at the time. And it's funny the way I got to Delaware. I was in Miami in 2013. And again, here's God doing for me what I was not able to do for myself. I was in active addiction and wanting to get out of it. And I was kneeling on the beach and crying my eyes out and asking God to please help me. And out of the blue, I ended up contacting an old friend of mine from the Marine Corps who lived in Delaware. And we started talking about my situation and everything else. And they said, hey, Carlos, come up here. Come up here. I haven't seen you in a decade. And I want to see you. And let's see if I can help you out. Knowing what I was going through because I was completely transparent. So I moved to Delaware. They paid for my ticket. I started working. Things were great. And it wasn't until my mom, this was in 2013 when I arrived, all the way up to 2017, things were great. I had a business. I had a great relationship. I was living in a very old historic town. I was making a lot of good money. But what happened, the beginning downfall of my relapse again, when my mother died, wasn't the fact that she died. It was my ego and my pride, because I had received such a high status within society, quote unquote, through my business, getting to rub elbows with city commissioners, people in the Hispanic community who were pretty high up in the Hispanic community, who were movers and shakers.
I'm smiling when you say you were moving with the movers and shakers, and I was wondering how that affected you particularly.
It affected my ego. I thought I thought my poop smelled like roses, and it didn't stink.
Oh, nice. Yeah. And at what point did you realize that it stunk?
Sorry, I didn't mean to be so graphic, but I thought it smelled like roses, and I didn't stink. And I thought I could do everything and anything, and nobody would be the wiser. But I had a partner who saw through all of that and who was very smart and intuitive. And my ego and my pride led to that downfall. So I chose to be home. I chose to go live in the woods in Delaware for those 2 years and to be alone. And because that conversation that I had with Jim about, when are things going to change, Carlos? When are things going to change for you? When are you going to change? When are you going to make the steps to change? Really, really stuck with me. And I found a very secluded spot because in Delaware, there's a lot of woods and a lot of homeless people tend to live out of the woods. So I found a very secluded spot all to myself. I didn't want to live with anybody else. And it was through this time where I would only go out to work. I wouldn't panhandle. I didn't ask people for money. I wouldn't ask people for food. I would go work. And there were times where I worked a day or two or a week or a month or a couple of months. And I would save my money. And I built a shelter and a campsite in the middle of the woods. And I had food. And if I didn't, if I didn't have work, but I had money and I had supplies, that was fine. I stayed right where I was. And I wrote a lot. I had a lot of
journaling. Yeah.
At the time, I didn't call it journaling.
What were you writing?
I hear this a lot now in mental health, but at the time, it was just free writing because when you're alone for so long, you start having these conversations with yourself. You think you're going nuts. You hear all these voices. Well, it's more like your own voice in your head, and you're like, what is this? Where's this all coming from? And it's you discovering you.
Absolutely. I often tell people, sit with your thoughts. It's going to give you so much insight about yourself that you wouldn't have had if you didn't. Sit with your thoughts, yes. So that was you doing like a self-conferencing. You and Gaines.
Yes. And it's also God talking to you. It's God talking to you, and it's the devil talking to you. It's demons talking to you. It's angels talking to you. It's the angels and God, I believe, talking to, and your own soul reaching out to you, and the soul of your ancestors reaching out to you when you're in such a predicament where you're giving yourself good advice, But the way it's in your head, it's like someone's talking to you. It's strange. I don't know if you understand what I'm saying. It's like if you had somebody sitting in front of you and they're talking to you and giving you advice. That's what it sounds like, but in your own voice in your head. And I feel that for me, those are the voices of my ancestors, my parents, my very soul, the angels, God. And then there's points where you're delving into self-deprecating thoughts, negative conversations, talking down to yourself, negative conversations where like, yeah, you know what? You know why you're here? It's because you're such a piece of garbage. Yeah, you're never gonna amount to anything. Why are you even gonna bother trying? Oh yeah, you think you're gonna do well living out here by yourself? These are demons.
Pardon me, Carlos. I really want to interject here because these thoughts are common to man. And I like that you're talking about it so that people would realize that when they're in that moment, those moments of solitude, you would hear a lot of voices. And it's important to have built a strength of character, emotional and mental strength to be able to fight back. And
Yeah.
when you're not able to fight back, the place of solitude can be a place of no return. So I want you to share how you fought back those voices and returned from that place. Because one of the things we talk about in this space of mental wellness is do not be solitary. Get company, get people that can speak positively into you, to inspire you, to charge you to move forward. But then when you find yourself in this place of solitude, it will take a lot of mental strength. And I'm speaking because I have been there. In the place where I once contemplated suicide, in that place, how do you jack yourself up and get yourself out of that place when there is no one to give you wise counsel? So I'd like to know how you shared that, how you got out from that. But let's take a quick break, take a bit of a breather, and we'll come back with Carlos in a moment. We are back, and Carlos is telling us all about how he went down the spiral, and we'd like him to tell us now how he came out of the spiral. Quite important. We're talking about before the break, the place of solitude, what it can do to us. How did you pick yourself out, and how have you found yourself stayed out, and what were the things that have helped you thus far?
So it's gonna sound crazy, but at the beginning, I would argue out loud with those negative voices, and I would have actual conversations back and forth, whether it was out loud or in my head. Sometimes it was full on arguments where I was picking up logs and throwing it, where I was projecting that energy to. It's like when you're having an argument with somebody, and it was a full on argument when I was having these negative thoughts. But the most important factor was admitting that I did have a problem and that I had no control over what was going on with me and my addiction. I had none. I had to ask God for forgiveness again and get a right relationship with God. And that happened over time. I don't feel that for me, it happened instantly. It happened over time through prayer and meditation and writing down my thoughts, writing down questions that would pop into my head and maybe coming back later and revisiting that question and then having an answer. Or sometimes it was straight up free writing. Sometimes I would just spend like an hour or not spend like an hour planned, but an hour, I would just start writing and an hour would go by. An hour and a half by the time I was done because I would stop because my hand got tired. And I would have all these free thoughts. And I would go back and reread this and I was like, wow, what is this? What just happened here?
Yeah.
And I came, it's like, where did this come from? And I came to realize that with time, the more I prayed and the more I was in tune with what was my reality and what I wanted to do about it and how I wanted to get out, the more I concentrated on wanting to get out, the more I found the solution through contemplation and through prayer and through eventual manifestation. I eventually came back to Miami, and again, because God did for me what I couldn't do for myself. We were in the middle of the pandemic, and God, you know what? God has a funny way of doing things sometimes. No, I don't know. He's a joker.
I really like that because, our brains, which I believe is a representation of God, that's the genius of God in us, has a limit. And it is where we can no longer function for ourselves that he steps in. So I like that phrase when you say God does for you what you can't in your human capacity do for yourself.
Yeah. God does for me what I can't do for myself. Can't. CAN''T. So I left Delaware, and for some weird reason I left it in October, and for some weird reason in August of that same year, 2020, my ex-wife reaches out to me on Facebook asking me if I'm alive, if I'm okay. This is my first wife, my high school sweetheart. And we start having a conversation, and she agrees to help me out when I come back to Miami. So listen, I'm getting out of Delaware. This is ridiculous, knowing how much worse Florida was. But she came, and she started being present in my life, and she started helping me. And unfortunately, in January of 2021, I had an incident where I landed in prison for 15 months. And during that whole 15 months, she was there. But it was at this very eureka moment where I sat in prison on my 15th day. Mind you, I was 7 days in county prison and about 5 days in federal prison or federal detention center. And I took a good look at myself, and I said, Carlos, are you done? Carlos, are you done? Because I was again in active addiction. I fell back into it. Even after my spiritual experience in Delaware, I came back to Miami. I started hanging out with the wrong people, doing the wrong things, going to the wrong places, people, places, and things. Wrong people, wrong places, wrong things. Old people, old places, old things. So what happened was I ended up in federal prison, and and I looked at myself in the mirror, and something said to me, Carlos, are you done? Look where you're at, buddy. You're in a federal detention center, and you're facing 10 years of federal prison time right now. What do you think about that, buddy? You like that? Come back to me. Let's have this conversation when you're ready. So a day later, I was back in the mirror and having this conversation again. And it was over a period of 4 months where I really got to buckle down, for lack of a better word, and choose to change. And over a period of 15 months.
It was a choice.
Yes.
Choice to change.
A choice of being sick and tired of being sick and tired. I chose to be proactive and do something about my situation, regardless of where I was. Because just because I was in prison didn't mean I could not work on myself. It was the best time to work on myself because I was isolated. It was a bit of a hermitage. I was in a cell with a roommate by myself, and I had nothing but time to read and time to focus on myself and see what was wrong with Carlos what was wrong with Carlos's thinking, what was wrong with Carlos's feelings, what was wrong with Carlos inside, and take a really deep, honest look at myself and be open-minded to really look at the bad parts of myself and my actions. What did I do? What did I say? What part did I play in this play of Carlos's life that led to Carlos being where Carlos is? And then I looked at other people. What part did other people play in my life? What did I allow people to do to me? Because we only allow people to do things to us that we allow them to do.
We only allow, absolutely. We only allow. And you know what I love about this is the fact that, and this is where introspection comes, where you come to the point where you unveil yourself and say, hey, what am I feeling? How did I get here? What part did I play? Because that is what now saves us from getting into the blame game and looking for who made us to be where we are, or who is the reason why this has happened, and then blaming every other person and never stopping to see ourselves to say, what did I allow? Consciously, unconsciously, what did I choose? Consciously, unconsciously. And then what am I going to do differently? And, you know, I really just love the fact that you were able to identify, for every time I go to the old place to be with the old people, to do the same old things that got me into the place I don't like, I will still be there.
Because remember, we have free will to choose to do whatever we want to do. But you know what's the universal paradox, Stephanie? That we're not free from the consequences of those choices. We're not free.
We have free will. We have free will to do whatever they like, but we don't have free. We're not free from the consequences of the things that we have.
Say that one more time, please.
We have free will to do whatever we want, but we are not free from the consequences of the free things that we did.
Exactly.
Wow, Carlos.
That's karma.
And wait, I wanted to ask, you said your wife came back, your ex-wife. Were you remarried in between after you were divorced?
Yes, I was remarried and I was divorced and I fell into other relationships in between all that time. And I was in one long-term relationship when I was living in Delaware where it was perfect. But I wasn't living an authentic life because I always self-sabotage myself. I always sacrifice things that I truly wanted just because this looked better. For example, I wanted children, and I kept falling into relationships where, these women could not have children, and I stayed just because they were good people, or because I liked them physically, or because they offered something, some kind of consolation. Instead of living authentically and genuinely, I said, listen, regardless of how good this person might be for me, maybe we should only be friends, or maybe not at all, because there might be some kind of thing there. I don't know. You know, I should have taken an inventory of myself and said to myself, Carlos, what is it you really want in your life? Do you want kids? So why are you hanging out? Why are you continuing to follow relationships that don't give you children? Be authentic. Live true.
I guess these are the things that you now ask yourself, that you can now, in retrospect, and you probably have asked yourself and come to that realization that, oh, right, I could have done this. But what are you grateful for? You know, one of the things I try to do in these conversations is let us, while we feel the depth or the emotion and sometimes the regret of the choices that we made, how do we not dwell? How do we refocus and rechannel that energy to the things that we currently have control over, the things that we're grateful for, our journey of healing and our aspirations for the future? So tell me about what has happened between you and your ex-wife, what has happened with Carlos now, and how is Carlos choosing himself and allowing other people into his space by choice?
That's a very interesting love story. So we got back together.
Oh,
So while in prison, we wrote each other letters. We spoke on the phone a lot.
oh wow.
She was there at my court dates. She was in conversations with my lawyer. She wrote the judge's letters twice towards the end of my sentencing. Once at the plea and once at sentencing. She was active and proactive during my incarceration, and when I got out, she was active and proactive in making sure that I was good. If I needed money for something, if I needed clothes, if I needed work, because at the time I had no work boots, no work clothes. She got me clothes. She helped me get a job. I paid her back. Things got better. Started saving money. I got into an accident on my bicycle where I got hit by a car, and I got money from that and from the insurance. And I bought a car. I mean, it happens, A friend of mine who's in recovery for over 19 years. Yeah, I didn't want to. I mean, I'm not that kind of guy. I don't do lawsuits. But a friend of mine who's in recovery for over 19 years said, "Carlos, trust me. I have 19 years of sobriety, and I'm not telling you this to take advantage of anything, but that's what insurance is for. That's what insurance is for. And you got hit on a car. Yeah, and you got hit by a car. You're lucky you didn't get killed. Listen, trust me. Go see a lawyer." And I went and saw a lawyer, one of the best lawyers here in Miami, and sure enough, I was able, because of that. And sometimes I wonder if God had a hand in this, because I needed money for a car. It's true. It's true. I wonder. Listen, I really needed money for a car because I tried to save it and save it and save it and save it and save it on my own, and it wasn't happening.
Pardon me, that was probably another moment where God did for you what you couldn't do for yourself. You needed a car, you needed to buy a car, but hey, he can buy a car, and then a car hits you, and by law it wasn't wrong. The insurance should cover that. So that just worked out in the way it worked out. Yeah.
Right. But it wasn't even that. I had so many things in Delaware legally that I had to fix, and I didn't have the money for in order to get back my license, that this situation afforded me the opportunity to not only pay back my ex-wife the money I owed her, it afforded me the opportunity to go to Delaware and fix my financial legal issues, come back, buy a car, get insurance, and help a couple other people out.
Thank you. There's so many things you've shared, and one of the particular things, and I want to use this as a point of, as some sort of encouragement to someone who is thinking that they've fallen so deep, they've lost loved ones. I like the fact that they said it's a miraculous love story. His wife, his high school sweetheart who had divorced him, came back, and I mean, she's just such a pillar of strength, staying there through while you were in prison, writing you letters, and just the fact that she reached out to you on Facebook after so many years to say, "Are you alive?" Right, and then comes back into your life and helps you to just put things in order and fix it. That is such a blessing, and I really just ask for more grace on her, and that your union is solidified. Yeah, and please, final words, Carlos. What are any final words that you would like to give to someone that's going to watch this episode?
So if there's anybody who's listening to you right now, I know that you have a very large French speaking community over in Nigeria and France and in other parts of the world who may not understand English that well. But if they do, and if you're watching, if you have children, please talk to your children. You who are parents, get involved with your children at a very early age. and check on them to see how their mental status is, how their emotional status is. Are they being bothered in school? Are they being bullied? Are they being molested? And I'm not talking sexually, I'm talking about mentally, emotionally. Also, yeah, make sure that your kids aren't being, sexually abused either. So to parents, talk to your children. Children, talk to your parents, because these are your parents. And if you're living in a living situation where you can't talk to your parents because your parents are using drugs, or your parents are the abusers, or your parents are not there, and I'm sorry that that's happening to you, talk to somebody you trust, a trusted adult, an elder, a grandparent, a grandparent, an uncle, an aunt, a cousin, someone, a clergy member, a school teacher, a principal, a police officer, a firefighter, a trusted servant and pillar of the community. Not someone else who's going to take more advantage of you. Parents, talk to your children. If you're suffering with drugs and alcohol abuse, there's nothing I can say that's going to make you stop if you don't want to stop. You have to want to stop. Like it was said to me, are you done? Are you done living a life of misery, shame, guilt, resentment? First, you have to be honest with yourself. You have to be honest, open-minded, and willing to be honest with yourself, open-minded with yourself, and willing with yourself to change. And trust in God. First and foremost, because God will do for you what you are not willing to do for yourself.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Carlos. Thank you so much, Carlos. I can't, for as many as are watching, this is words of marble, and Carlos's story is such an inspiration to as many as may be going through the same thing that he has gone through, but he if he could come out of it, hey, you also have the strength to come out of it. And there's so many people that have found themselves in that place of solitude, and they have found their ways out of it. This is just to encourage you that, hey, you're not alone, to let you know that you have the willpower, you have the strength in you. Just find it and fight out of that place. Remember, one of the things I always say is, no matter what comes or goes, no matter what gives in or doesn't, you never give up until you win. And even if you don't win, ensure by all means that you finish strong. And if you have the strength to do it all over again, please do it. Thank you so much for joining this session.